I stood at the head of my dining room table, surrounded by balloons and streamers in shades of silver and lavender, watching my son Marcus cut into the three-tiered birthday cake I'd spent 2 days baking myself. 70 candles had been too many to fit, so I'd settled for 7 tall ones representing each decade of my life. The flames flickered in the late afternoon light streaming through the bay windows of the craftsman-style home I'd lived in for 42 years. My daughter-in-law Vanessa sat beside him, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the mahogany table my late husband Robert had built with his own hands 3 decades ago. Their twin daughters, my granddaughters Sophie and Charlotte, were glued to their phones in the corner, barely acknowledging the celebration. I should have known something was wrong by the forced smiles, by the way Marcus kept glancing at Vanessa for approval before speaking, by the tension that hung in the air like smoke. But I was too caught up in the moment, too grateful they'd come at all, to see what was coming. After the cake was served and the obligatory singing of Happy Birthday had faded into awkward silence, Marcus cleared his throat and stood up. His 6-foot frame cast a shadow across the table as he pulled a folder from his briefcase. My heart started racing even before he opened his mouth. Something about the clinical way he opened that folder, the businesslike expression on his face, told me this wasn't going to be good. He looked at me then, and I saw a stranger behind those hazel eyes I'd gazed into the day he was born, the same eyes that had looked up at me with wonder when I taught him to read, with gratitude when I worked 3 jobs to put him through medical school. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Dorothy Hayes, and I've spent the last 70 years building a life I thought meant something. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress, learned early that nothing comes easy and everything worth having requires sacrifice. I met Robert when I was 19, married him at 20, and we built our life together from scratch. He was a carpenter and a good man, the kind who'd give you the shirt off his back even if it was the only one he owned. We had Marcus when I was 25, raised him in this house that Robert designed and constructed board by board. I watched my husband pour his soul into every corner of this place. Every custom cabinet and hand-carved banister, a testament to his love for our family. When Robert died of a heart attack 15 years ago, I thought I might die too. The grief was so heavy I could barely breathe for months. But I survived because that's what you do when you have responsibilities, when you have a son who needs you, when you have a home that holds every memory of the man you loved. I kept working at the library where I'd been a librarian for 35 years, kept maintaining this house exactly how Robert would have wanted, kept showing up for Marcus even when he barely called anymore. I retired 5 years ago with a modest pension, enough to live comfortably, enough to keep the house running, enough to help Marcus and Vanessa whenever they asked. Marcus met Vanessa during his residency at Portland General Hospital. She was a pharmaceutical sales representative, beautiful and ambitious with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I tried to like her, I really did. I showed up at their wedding with a genuine smile and an open heart. I babysat Sophie and Charlotte every weekend for the first 5 years of their lives, reading them stories and teaching them to bake cookies the way I taught Marcus. I never complained when Vanessa would drop them off early and pick them up late, never said a word when she'd cancel plans at the last minute or forget to invite me to important family events. I told myself it was just her personality, that some people aren't warm and fuzzy, that I should be grateful my son had found someone successful and driven. But over the years I started to notice things. The way she'd calculate the cost of every gift I gave, mention how much space my old furniture took up when they visited, suggest that maybe I was getting too old to live alone in such a big house. She started planting seeds, little comments about how exhausting it must be for me to maintain the property, how dangerous it was for someone my age to navigate stairs, how much easier my life would be in a more manageable situation. I brushed it off, told myself I was being paranoid, that surely my son wouldn't let anyone talk about his mother that way. Marcus stood there at my birthday celebration, that folder in his hands, and began to speak in the measured tone he probably used with difficult patience. Mother, Vanessa and I have been discussing your living situation, and we think it's time to make some changes. We've found a wonderful assisted living facility called Meadowbrook Gardens about 30 miles from here. It has excellent reviews, 24-hour nursing staff, activities programs, everything you could need. The words hit me like physical blows. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white against the dark wood. What are you talking about, Marcus? I'm perfectly fine. I live here. This is my home. Vanessa leaned forward then, her voice dripping with false concern. Dorothy, we're just worried about you. You're 70 now. What if you fall and no one's there to help? What if you have a medical emergency? It's irresponsible for us to let you continue living alone in a house this size. I looked at my son, searching for any sign of the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for. Marcus, I raised you in this house. Your father built every inch of it. You can't be serious about this. He wouldn't meet my eyes. We've already put down a deposit, Mom. Your room will be ready in 2 weeks. We'll help you pack and move your essential belongings. The house will need to be sold to cover the costs of the facility and, well, we need to think about the future. The room started spinning. Sold. They wanted to sell Robert's house, the house we'd built together, the house that held 42 years of memories, the house I'd promised him I'd never leave. You want to sell my house? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Vanessa stood up, smoothing her designer dress. It's not really about what anyone wants, Dorothy. It's about what makes sense. The property taxes alone are astronomical, and frankly, it's worth quite a bit. The money from the sale will ensure you're comfortable at Meadowbrook, and anything left over can be put towards Sophie and Charlotte's college funds. They're starting to look at schools, and Ivy League tuitions are no joke. I felt sick. They'd already planned it all out, already decided my fate, already calculated how much my life was worth and how they could divide up the proceeds. This is my home, I said, my voice stronger now. I'm not going anywhere. Marcus finally looked at me, and there was something cold in his expression, something I'd never seen before. Mom, be reasonable. You don't have a choice here. We're your family, and we're making this decision for your own good. You're not thinking clearly. People your age often can't see what's best for them. I stood up then, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Get out. The words came out low and dangerous. What? Marcus looked genuinely shocked. I said get out of my house. All of you. Now. Vanessa laughed, actually laughed. Dorothy, you're being dramatic. This is exactly the kind of irrational behavior that proves you need supervised care. I walked to the front door and opened it wide, my hands shaking with rage and hurt and something else, something that felt almost like relief. The masks had finally come off. I could see them clearly now for what they were. Get out, I repeated. And don't come back until you're ready to apologize and treat me with the respect I deserve. Marcus grabbed his briefcase and Vanessa herded the girls toward the door, both of them texting frantically, completely oblivious to the family implosion happening around them. You're making a mistake, Mom, Marcus said as he passed me. We're trying to help you. No, I said quietly. You're trying to help yourselves. And you just made the biggest mistake of your life. I closed the door behind them and stood in the entryway of my home, surrounded by the remnants of a birthday party that had turned into an ambush. The cake sat half-eaten on the table, the balloons bobbed gently in the air conditioning, and I felt more alone than I had since the day Robert died. But I also felt something else stirring inside me, something fierce and protective. They thought I was a helpless old woman they could dispose of like an inconvenient piece of furniture. They thought I'd go quietly, that I'd sign whatever papers they put in front of me and shuffle off to some sterile facility to wait out my remaining years. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I walked into Robert's study, the room I'd kept exactly as he'd left it, and pulled out the leather portfolio where I kept all my important documents. Inside was my will, the one I'd updated just 6 months ago with my attorney Gerald Morrison. I'd been meticulous about my estate planning, had made sure every detail was exactly right. Marcus and Vanessa thought they knew what I had, thought they'd done the math on what my house was worth and how they could spend it. They had no idea what was coming. I picked up the phone and dialed Gerald's number. Even though it was after hours, he answered on the third ring. Dorothy, is everything all right? Gerald had been Robert's best friend since college, had stood up at our wedding, had drawn up our wills and helped us with every legal matter for 4 decades. He was 75 now, semi-retired but still sharp as ever. I need to schedule a meeting, I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. And I need you to help me send a message my son won't forget. He was quiet for a moment. Then I heard the sound of papers rustling. Tell me what happened. I spent the next hour recounting the disaster of my birthday party. Every cruel word, Every calculated manipulation. Gerald listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he let out a long breath. I'm sorry, Dorothy. I know how much you love Marcus. But I have to say I'm not entirely surprised. Vanessa called my office 3 weeks ago asking about your estate. What? My stomach dropped. She wanted to know if there were any assets beyond the house, asked about life insurance policies, investment accounts, that sort of thing. I told her I couldn't discuss your private affairs and she got quite hostile. I meant to mention it to you, but I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily. I should have known something like this was coming. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of their betrayal settle over me like a heavy blanket. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The birthday party had just been their chosen moment to spring the trap. Gerald, I said slowly, I want to make some changes to my will. Significant changes.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Good, he replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. I was hoping you'd say that. Let's make sure Marcus understands exactly what he's throwing away. We scheduled a meeting for the following morning, and after I hung up, I sat in Robert's chair and let myself cry. Not for myself, but for the son I thought I'd raised, for the family I thought I had, for the naive woman who'd believed that love and sacrifice would be enough. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, each gong echoing through the empty house. I wiped my tears and stood up, my resolve hardening with each breath. They wanted to treat me like I was senile and helpless? Fine. I'd show them exactly how sharp and capable a 70-year-old woman could be. The next morning I woke up to 17 missed calls and twice as many text messages. Most were from Marcus, increasingly frantic demands that I call him back immediately. 3 were from Vanessa, saccharine sweet messages about how they were only thinking of my best interests and I should really reconsider my hasty reaction. I deleted them all without responding. Instead, I showered, dressed in my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to Robert's funeral and kept for important occasions, and drove to Gerald's office downtown. The law firm of Morrison & Associates occupied the 5th floor of a historic building in the heart of the city, all exposed brick and tall windows overlooking the river. Gerald's secretary Margaret greeted me with a warm hug and ushered me into his corner office. Dorothy, Gerald said, standing to embrace me. You look fierce. Good. That's exactly the energy we need. He gestured to the conference table where several documents were already spread out. I spent last night reviewing your current will and estate plan. Before we make any changes, I want you to understand exactly what you have. He walked me through everything methodically. The house, appraised most recently at $1.2 million thanks to the booming real estate market and Robert's impeccable craftsmanship. My retirement accounts and pension worth another $400,000. My life insurance policy, $250,000. Various investment accounts and savings, another $300,000. All told, my estate was worth just over $2 million. I stared at the numbers, stunned. I'd known I was comfortable, but I'd had no idea the house had appreciated so much, that Robert's careful investing over the years had grown to such a sum. Marcus and Vanessa knew, Gerald said quietly. Or at least they suspected. That's why they're so eager to warehouse you in a facility and sell everything off. At 30 miles away, you'd be just far enough to make visiting inconvenient, just isolated enough that they could control the narrative. I felt sick again. What did my current will say? Gerald pulled out the document. As it stands, everything goes to Marcus, with a provision that he maintain the house for at least 5 years before selling to honor Robert's memory. There's also a clause about your care, stipulating that you be allowed to remain in your home, as long as medically possible. So essentially, I said slowly, I wrote a will that trusted my son to do the right thing. Yes, Gerald replied. And now we know that trust was misplaced. I want to change it, I said firmly. All of it. Gerald smiled, the kind of smile a chess player gets when they see a winning move. I was hoping you'd say that. Let me tell you what I'm proposing. We spent the next 3 hours crafting a new will that would send a very clear message. The house would be placed in an irrevocable trust, with me as the primary beneficiary for life. Upon my death, it would go not to Marcus, but to a historic preservation society with strict requirements that it be maintained exactly as Robert had built it, a testament to his craftsmanship and our life together. My financial assets would be divided among several charities I'd supported over the years, the local library system, a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, a women's shelter I'd volunteered at for decades. Marcus would receive exactly $1 and a letter explaining why. But the coup de grace, the detail that made me smile despite everything, was a specific provision Gerald suggested. If Marcus or anyone acting on his behalf attempted to challenge my competency or have me declared unfit to make my own decisions, he would be automatically disinherited entirely, receiving nothing. Furthermore, if he made any attempt to force me into assisted living or gain power of attorney through coercion, all photographs, letters, and documentation of Robert's work on the house would be donated to the Historical Society with a full accounting of Marcus's actions made public record. Your father's legacy would become permanently tied to your son's betrayal, Gerald explained. Marcus is proud he's built a reputation in the medical community. Having his name associated with elder abuse and greed would destroy everything he's worked for. It's mutually assured destruction, essentially. He can't touch you without destroying himself. I signed every page, my hand steady despite the magnitude of what I was doing. This felt right, felt like protecting not just myself but Robert's memory. Felt like drawing a line that should never have needed to be drawn. When it was done, Gerald made copies and filed the original with the court, making it official and uncontestable. Now comes the interesting part, he said, leaning back in his chair. How do you want to tell him? I thought about that for a long moment. Marcus had blindsided me at my birthday party, had used what should have been a celebration as an opportunity to ambush me with his plans. Turnabout seemed only fair. I want to invite them to dinner, I said slowly. Next Sunday. Make it seem like I've reconsidered, that I want to discuss things rationally. And then, after we eat, after they think they've won, I'll tell them exactly what they've lost. Gerald's grin was positively wolfish. Dorothy Hayes, you are a woman after my own heart. Let's make sure they never forget this lesson. I left Gerald's office feeling lighter than I had in days. The spring sun was warm on my face as I walked to my car. And for the first time since that disastrous birthday party, I felt like myself again. Not some helpless old woman to be managed and moved around like a chess piece, but Dorothy Hayes, librarian, widow, mother, fighter. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home and bought ingredients for Marcus's favorite meal. The pot roast with roasted vegetables and homemade rolls I'd made for every special occasion throughout his childhood. If this was going to be our last family dinner, I'd make sure it was memorable. That evening, I sent Marcus a carefully worded text message. I've had some time to think about what you said. You're right that we need to talk about the future. Why don't you, Vanessa, and the girls come for dinner next Sunday? I'll make your favorite pot roast. We can discuss everything calmly and figure out a path forward. His response came within minutes. That's great, Mom. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. We'll be there at 6. See you Sunday. I stared at that word reasonable and felt anger flare hot in my chest. Reasonable. As if anything about their ambush had been reasonable. As if selling my house and shipping me off to die in some facility was the rational choice. As if I was the problem for refusing to go quietly. But I pushed the anger down, channeled it into something useful. They wanted reasonable? I'd show them reasonable. The week passed slowly, each day feeling longer than the last. I cleaned the house from top to bottom. Not because it needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands, needed to keep busy so I wouldn't dwell on what was coming. I pulled out the good china, the set Robert and I had received as a wedding gift and used only for holidays and important occasions. I polished the silver candlesticks, pressed the linen napkins, arranged fresh flowers from my garden in the crystal vase that had been Robert's mother's. If this was going to be our last meal together as a family, I'd make sure it was perfect. Saturday night I prepared the pot roast, letting it marinate overnight in red wine and herbs the way Robert had taught me. Sunday morning I woke early and started the roasting vegetables, made the dough for the rolls, set the dining room table with meticulous care. By 5 o'clock the house smelled like comfort and home, like every happy memory we'd ever made within these walls. I dressed carefully in a soft blue sweater and dark slacks, styled my silver hair the way Robert had always liked, put on the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 40th anniversary. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw not an old woman to be discarded, but someone who had lived and loved and built a life worth protecting. Marcus, Vanessa, Sophie, and Charlotte arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, punctual as always. The girls immediately headed for the living room and their phones, But Marcus and Vanessa followed me into the kitchen. Vanessa carrying a bottle of expensive wine. I suspected she'd chosen more for show than taste. "This smells amazing, Mom," Marcus said, and for just a moment I saw a flash of the boy he'd been, the one who'd sit at this same kitchen counter doing homework while I cooked dinner. Then Vanessa touched his arm and the moment passed. "We brought the brochures for Meadowbrook," she said, pulling glossy folders from her designer handbag. "I thought we could go through them after dinner, start planning the transition timeline." I smiled, the expression feeling strange on my face. "Let's eat first. We can discuss everything afterward." We sat down to dinner, the 6 of us arranged around the mahogany table, and I watched them eat my food, compliment my cooking, make small talk about Marcus's work at the hospital and the girls' upcoming school year. Vanessa mentioned a vacation they were planning to Tuscany, casually noted that they'd been saving for years but just couldn't quite make the numbers work. Not yet anyway. The implication hung in the air like smoke. They were counting my money, spending my estate before I was even dead. After dinner, as I was clearing the plates, Marcus cleared his throat in that same officious way he had at my birthday party. "So Mom," he began, "have you had time to think about what we discussed? About Meadowbrook?" I set down the stack of plates I was carrying and turned to face them. "I've thought about very little else." His face lit up with relief. "That's great. I know change is scary, but this really is for the best." Vanessa was already spreading the brochures across the table, pointing out features like she was a realtor selling a house. "The facility has a beautiful courtyard," she said, "and they have movie nights every Friday. You'll make so many new friends." I walked back to the table and sat down, folding my hands in front of me. "Before we go any further, there's something I need to tell you. I've made some changes." Marcus frowned. "Changes?" "I met with my attorney Gerald Morrison last Monday. We've completely revised my will and estate plan." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, like someone had sucked all the oxygen out. Vanessa's smile froze on her face. Marcus's expression went carefully blank. "That seems a bit hasty, Mom." Vanessa's voice was tight. "Surely you should have consulted with us first before making major financial decisions." I looked directly at my son. Why would I consult with someone who's trying to have me declared incompetent and steal my home? The words hung in the air like a bomb. Marcus's face went red, then white. "That's not what we're doing. We're trying to help you." "Are you?" I asked softly, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to warehouse me so you can sell my house and spend my money. Vanessa stood up abruptly. "We don't have to listen to these accusations. Marcus, let's go." "Sit down," I said, and something in my voice made her pause. "You wanted to discuss my future. Well, here it is. I'm not going to Meadowbrook. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying in my home, the home your father built with his own hands, Marcus, until the day I die. And when that day comes, this house won't be yours to sell." "Mom," Marcus started, but I held up my hand. "The house is now in an irrevocable trust. Upon my death, it goes to the Portland Historic Preservation Society, with strict requirements that it be maintained as a testament to Robert's craftsmanship. You'll never see a penny from it." Vanessa had gone pale. "You can't do that." "It's my estate," I said calmly. "I can do whatever I want with it. And I have. What about the rest?" Marcus's voice was hollow. "The investment accounts, the life insurance, the retirement funds. All of it is going to charity," I said, watching their faces crumble. "The library system. A scholarship fund. The women's shelter. Organizations that actually help people instead of exploiting them. Except for you, Marcus. You'll get exactly $1 and a letter explaining why." He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "You're insane. This is exactly why you need supervised care. You're not thinking clearly." "On the contrary," I said, my voice steady. "I've never thought more clearly in my life. And here's the best part. If you or anyone acting on your behalf tries to challenge my competency or force me into assisted living, you'll be completely disinherited. Not just from the will, but from your father's legacy. Every document, every photograph, every piece of Robert's work will be donated to the Historical Society, along with a full accounting of how his son tried to exploit his elderly mother. Your name will be forever associated with elder abuse and greed. Everything you've built, your reputation as a respected physician, gone." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the calculations happening behind Marcus's eyes, The realization that I'd backed him into a corner with no escape. Vanessa was the first to recover, her face twisting with rage. You spiteful old woman. You'd rather give everything to strangers than to your own family? You are not my family, I said, and meant it. Family doesn't ambush you at your birthday party. Family doesn't try to steal your home. Family doesn't look at you and see dollar signs instead of a person. Marcus just stood there looking lost. Mom, please. This isn't who you are. You're right, I said quietly. The woman who would have let you do this to her isn't who I am. Not anymore. You thought I was weak because I'm old, that you could manipulate me because you're a doctor and I'm just your uneducated mother. But you forgot something, Marcus. I survived the depression as a child. I built a life from nothing. I raised you alone after your father died and never once asked for anything in return. I am not weak. And I am not yours to control. Vanessa grabbed her purse. This isn't over. We'll fight this. We'll prove you're not competent. Go ahead, I said. Gerald Morrison has documented everything. Every text message, every call log, every witness to your behavior at my birthday party. Take me to court and I'll make sure every detail becomes public record. Your colleagues at Portland General will love reading about how you tried to institutionalize your mother to get her money. Marcus, your choice is simple. Walk away with your dignity intact, or fight me and lose everything including your reputation. Choose wisely. They left without another word. Vanessa dragging a shell-shocked Marcus and the confused girls out the door. I watched from the window as their car pulled away, taillights disappearing into the spring evening, and felt something release in my chest. Grief, yes, but also relief. I'd spent 70 years being what other people needed me to be. Dutiful daughter, supporting wife, sacrificing mother, always putting others first, always making myself smaller to make them comfortable. No more. I walked through my house, this beautiful home Robert and I had built together, running my hands along the custom moldings he'd carved, the banister he'd sanded smooth, the built-in bookcases he'd designed specifically to hold my collection of first editions. This was my legacy. This was my life. And I'd be damned if I'd let anyone take it from me. The following weeks were quiet. Marcus didn't call. Vanessa didn't text. The girls didn't reach out. I told myself I didn't care, that I was better off without them, but late at night I'd look at photos of Marcus as a boy and feel the loss like a physical ache. I'd given him everything, sacrificed everything, and it hadn't been enough. Or maybe it had been too much. Maybe by never requiring him to sacrifice anything in return, I'd raised someone who believed the world owed him whatever he wanted. Gerald called regularly to check on me, made sure I knew I'd done the right thing. Linda, my best friend from the library, started coming over for tea twice a week, keeping me company without asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. My neighbors, who'd heard through the grapevine about the falling out, began including me in their gatherings, their dinner parties, their book clubs. I realized I'd been so focused on being Marcus's mother that I'd forgotten to have a life of my own. But I was remembering now. I started volunteering at the women's shelter 3 days a week, teaching literacy classes to women who'd never had the chance to learn. I joined a hiking group for seniors and discovered muscles I'd forgotten I had. I took up watercolor painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. I was 70 years old and for the first time in my life I was living for myself. 3 months after our catastrophic final dinner, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was Marcus and Vanessa's house, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. I opened it carefully and found a note from Sophie, my 16-year-old granddaughter. Dear Grandma Dorothy, it began. I don't know if you'll want to hear from me after everything that happened. Mom and Dad said we shouldn't contact you, that you made your choice. But I think they're wrong. I think they were wrong about everything. I wanted you to know that, Charlotte, and I miss you. We miss your stories and your cookies and the way you always listened to us like we mattered. Mom and Dad have been fighting constantly since that dinner. Dad seems sad all the time. Mom is angry. And I'm starting to understand what really happened, what they tried to do to you. I'm ashamed that I didn't speak up, that I just sat there on my phone while they treated you so horribly. I was reading the letter through tears now, my hands shaking. I hope someday you can forgive me, Sophie wrote. I hope someday I can visit you and hear more stories about Grandpa Robert and see the house he built. Mom and Dad say it should have been ours, but I think it should be exactly what you want it to be. You earned it. I love you, Grandma. Always. Sophie. I held that letter to my chest and really cried for the first time since Robert died. Not tears of grief or anger, but of something more complicated. Hope maybe. Or possibility. I wrote Sophie back that same day, told her she was welcome in my home anytime, that I loved her and Charlotte and nothing that had happened was their fault. I gave her my phone number and told her to call whenever she wanted. 2 weeks later she did. We talked for hours about school and boys and her dreams of becoming a writer. She told me Marcus had been passed over for a promotion at the hospital, that rumor had it some of his colleagues had heard about the situation with me and questioned his judgment. Vanessa had stopped working, claiming stress, but was spending money faster than ever as if trying to fill some void that couldn't be filled. I listened and didn't say I told you so, even though I wanted to. Sophie started calling every Sunday, sometimes bringing Charlotte on the line. I started to see a path forward, not to reconciliation with Marcus and Vanessa, but to relationships with my granddaughters that weren't filtered through their parents' greed and manipulation. One Sunday in late autumn, 6 months after everything fell apart, Sophie asked if she could visit. Just me, she said. Charlotte's not ready yet and Mom and Dad definitely don't know. I told her yes before she even finished asking. She arrived on a Saturday morning in October, taking the bus across town because she didn't have her license yet. I met her at the door and we stood looking at each other for a long moment before she threw her arms around me and started crying. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry. We spent the day together, walking through the house as I told her stories about each room, each piece of furniture, each detail her grandfather had crafted. I showed her photos of Marcus as a boy, let her see the good man I'd raised before greed and manipulation twisted him into someone I barely recognized. I made her grandfather's favorite cookies and we sat in the kitchen eating them still warm from the oven, while she told me about her dreams of studying creative writing in college. You know, I said carefully, there's a scholarship fund I've established for first-generation college students. You wouldn't qualify as first-generation, but I could talk to the board about expanding the criteria. Your grandfather always believed in education, in helping young people chase their dreams. Sophie looked at me with tears in her eyes. You do that? After everything our family did to you? You're not your parents, I said firmly. You're your own person. And you're still my granddaughter. That hasn't changed. Before she left that evening, she hugged me tight and whispered thank you. Not just for the scholarship talk, but for showing her what strength looks like, what standing up for yourself looks like, what refusing to be a victim looks like. After she left, I stood in my doorway and watched the autumn leaves fall from the maple trees Robert had planted 40 years ago. I thought about legacy, about what we leave behind, about what matters in the end. Marcus would never inherit this house, would never profit from my death, would never be able to rewrite the narrative of what he'd tried to do. But maybe, just maybe, my granddaughters would inherit something more valuable than money or property. Maybe they'd inherit the knowledge that you don't have to accept mistreatment, even from family. That your worth isn't determined by your age, or your usefulness to others. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no. I went back inside my house, this beautiful testament to love and craftsmanship and a life well lived, and felt at peace. Marcus had thought my 70th birthday would mark the beginning of my decline, the moment he could finally take control and cash in. Instead, it had marked the beginning of something else entirely. My liberation. My reclamation of the life I'd built. My refusal to go gently into any night I hadn't chosen for myself. The clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, the same clock that had marked the hours of my life for 4 decades. But this time each chime didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like a beginning. I walked into the kitchen and started making dinner. Just for myself in the house I'd fought for and won. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Tomorrow Sophie would call and we'd talk about books and dreams and the future. Tomorrow I'd volunteer at the shelter and paint in my studio, and go hiking with women who'd become real friends. Tomorrow Marcus would wake up and realize what he'd thrown away, what he'd lost not through my cruelty but through his own greed. And I would wake up in my own bed, in my own house, mistress of my own fate at 70 years old. They'd wanted to put me in a home, to make me disappear, to erase me from my own life. Instead, I'd shown them exactly what a woman who refuses to disappear looks like. I poured myself a glass of Robert's favorite wine, the bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and raised it to the empty room. To second acts, I said aloud. to refusing to be diminished, to knowing your worth. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, Robert's craftsmanship holding strong after all these years. This house would stand long after I was gone, would be preserved and protected, would tell the story of a carpenter who loved his family and a woman who fought to honor that love. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Thank you for today, Grandma. You're my hero." I smiled and typed back, "You're mine too, sweetheart. See you soon." And I meant it. This wasn't an ending. It was exactly what I'd toasted to, a second act. A new beginning. A life reclaimed. At 70 years old, I was finally truly free. I spent the following months rebuilding my life in ways I'd never imagined possible. The house that Marcus and Vanessa had tried to steal became not just my sanctuary but my purpose. I started documenting every detail of Robert's craftsmanship, photographing the hand-carved crown molding in the living room, the custom cabinetry in the kitchen with its dovetail joints so precise you could barely see the seams, the built-in window seats with their hidden storage compartments. I filled notebooks with measurements and techniques, interviewed other craftsmen who'd known Robert, gathered stories about his process and his passion. The Portland Historic Preservation Society sent a representative named Thomas Chan, a younger man maybe in his early 40s with an enthusiasm for architectural history that reminded me of Robert. He spent 3 days going through the house with me, taking photographs and notes, exclaiming over details that most people would never notice. The way Robert had matched the grain in the wood paneling so it flowed seamlessly from one board to the next. The hand-forged iron hinges on the doors, each one slightly different, each one a small work of art. The stained glass window over the landing that Robert had designed himself, incorporating our initials intertwined with maple leaves. "This is extraordinary," Thomas said, running his hand along the banister with reverence. "Your husband was a true master. Most modern builders have lost these skills entirely. Everything is prefabricated now, mass-produced. This kind of craftsmanship is becoming extinct." "That's exactly why I want it preserved," I told him. Robert poured his soul into this house. Every nail, every board, every detail was chosen with intention and care. When I'm gone, I want people to be able to see what's possible when you build with love instead of just profit. Thomas looked at me then with something like awe. "Mrs. Hayes, I have to tell you, we receive dozens of property offers every year. Historic homes, buildings with architectural significance, all of it. But most of them come with complications. Families fighting over inheritance, multiple claimants, unclear ownership. What you're doing, setting this up as an irrevocable trust with clear terms and full documentation, it's remarkable. You're making it possible for us to actually preserve your husband's work, instead of watching it get torn down or subdivided or ruined by renovations." "That's the goal," I said simply. My son wanted to sell this place to the highest bidder, probably some developer who'd gut it and turn it into condos. Over my dead body. Literally. Thomas laughed, but his eyes were serious. "Your son doesn't know what he's lost. Most people would give anything to have this kind of legacy to pass down. He threw it away for money he'll never see." We finalized the arrangements over the following weeks. The house would remain mine for life, maintained exactly as I wanted. Upon my death, it would transfer to the Preservation Society with an endowment from my life insurance to cover maintenance, and eventually open it for tours and educational programs. Local schools would bring students to learn about traditional craftsmanship. Architecture students would study Robert's techniques. The house would become a living museum, a testament to what one man with skill and dedication could create. Gerald was pleased when I told him about the arrangements. "You've turned their greed into something beautiful," he said over lunch at our favorite downtown cafe. "Most people in your situation would be bitter, would want revenge. Instead, you're creating something that will last. That's the best revenge," I told him. "Not bitterness or retaliation, but building something they can never touch, never ruin, never profit from." Marcus will have to live the rest of his life knowing he gambled on my death and lost everything. Gerald raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To Dorothy Hayes, who refuses to be defeated." I clinked my cup against his and felt something settle in my chest. Peace maybe. Or purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The women's shelter where I volunteered asked me to join their board of directors that November. They'd heard about my situation through Linda, who volunteered there as well, and thought my perspective would be valuable. Many of our residents are elderly women, explained Patricia, the shelter director, a warm black woman in her 50s who'd started the organization 20 years earlier. Women whose families have abandoned them or tried to exploit them financially. They need to see examples of women who fought back and won. I accepted immediately. The first board meeting I attended, I met 6 other women who'd survived various forms of family betrayal and financial abuse. Margaret, 73, whose daughter had forged her signature on loan documents and stolen her retirement savings. Ruth, 68, whose son-in-law had convinced her to sign over power of attorney, and then sold her house while she was in the hospital. Janet, 81, whose grandchildren had systematically emptied her bank accounts while promising to care for her. Each story was different in the details but the same in the essentials. Family members who saw vulnerability instead of humanity, who calculated worth in dollars instead of dignity, who believed that age gave them the right to control and exploit. We need to start a legal advocacy program, I said at that first meeting. These women need access to attorneys who understand elder abuse, who can help them fight back before everything is lost. The other board members looked at each other, then at Patricia. That's exactly what we've been saying, Patricia told me. But legal services are expensive and most of our funding goes to immediate needs. Housing, food, medical care. There's never enough for prevention. What if we fundraise specifically for it? I suggested. Host an event, reach out to law firms, build a network of attorneys willing to take cases pro bono or reduced rates. I know Gerald would help. He's been my attorney for 40 years and he's furious about what Marcus tried to do. I bet he knows other lawyers who'd want to get involved. Over the next 2 months we built the program from nothing. Gerald recruited 5 other attorneys from firms around the city, all of them specializing in estate law and elder abuse. We secured a grant from a foundation that funded legal aid programs. We created a hotline and a website. We called it the Silver Shield Legal Advocacy Project. And within a month of launching, we had 30 women seeking help. The stories broke my heart and made me grateful in equal measure. Grateful that I'd had the resources and the support to fight back. Heartbroken that so many others didn't. We helped Rose, 76, whose son had moved into her house and refused to leave, threatening her whenever she mentioned calling the police. We helped Barbara, 69, whose daughter-in-law had convinced her to add her name to the deed of her property and was now trying to force a sale. We helped Diane, 74, whose nephew had isolated her from friends and family and was systematically draining her accounts. Each case was different but the legal strategies were similar. Documentation, witnesses, quick action before more damage could be done. And in every case, the women had the same look in their eyes when we told them we could help. The look I probably had when Gerald explained my options. Disbelief mixed with desperate hope. The knowledge that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as powerless as they'd been told. In February, 8 months after Marcus's ambush at my birthday party, Sophie called with unexpected news. Charlotte wants to visit too, she said quietly. She's been watching everything happen with Mom and Dad, and I think she's starting to understand what they did was wrong. I felt my heart jump. Of course she can visit. Anytime. Both of you always. There's a condition though, Sophie said hesitantly. She wants to apologize. She feels guilty for not speaking up, for just sitting there while they treated you that way. She's worried you won't forgive her. Tell her there's nothing to forgive, I said firmly. She was 14 years old. This was never her responsibility. But yes, tell her I'd love to see her. They came together the following Saturday, taking the bus just like Sophie had months before. Charlotte hung back when I opened the door, her face uncertain, but I pulled her into a hug and felt her start to cry against my shoulder. I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry I didn't do anything. You were a child, I told her, pulling back to look at her face. Your parents put you in an impossible situation. That was their failure, not yours. We spent the afternoon together, the 3 of us, and it felt like reclaiming something I thought was lost forever. I told them stories about their grandfather, showed them the workshop in the basement where he'd kept his tools, let them hold the hand planes and chisels he'd used to create the details throughout the house. He would have been so proud of you both, I told them. Not because of grades or achievements but because you're thinking for yourselves. Because you're questioning what you've been told and forming your own judgments. That's the most important skill anyone can have. Charlotte picked up one of Robert's chisels. examining the worn wooden handle shaped by decades of use. Dad never talks about Grandpa anymore, she said quietly. Think he's ashamed. He should be, Sophie said, her voice sharp. What he did was awful. I held up my hand. Your father made choices he'll have to live with. But he's still your father and I won't poison you against him. That's not my job and it's not my desire. What I want is for you to have the tools to protect yourselves, to recognize manipulation and exploitation when you see it, to know that you always have value beyond what you can provide to other people. Before they left that evening, I gave each of them a small wooden box Robert had made years ago, each one carved with their initials. Inside Sophie's, I'd placed a first edition of her favorite book from childhood, along with a letter I'd written about believing in your own voice. Inside Charlotte's, I'd placed a silver bracelet that had belonged to Robert's mother along with a letter about knowing your worth. These are yours, I told them. Not inheritance, not conditional gifts. Yours because I love you and because you deserve to have something tangible from your family's history that no one can take away. They both cried then, and so did I, but they were good tears. Healing tears. Spring arrived and with it came an unexpected invitation. Thomas from the Historic Preservation Society called to ask if I'd be willing to speak at their annual fundraising gala about Robert's work and my decision to preserve the house. We've never had a donor speak before, he explained, but your story is so compelling. The combination of master craftsmanship and your fight to protect it, the way you've turned family betrayal into lasting legacy, it resonates with our mission in a powerful way. I'd never been comfortable with public speaking, had spent my life being quietly supportive rather than center stage. But something about this felt right. I told him yes. The gala was held at a historic hotel downtown in April, nearly a year after that disastrous birthday party. I bought a new dress for the occasion, deep emerald green that Linda insisted brought out my eyes, and spent hours working on my speech with Gerald's help. Don't just tell them about the house, he advised. Tell them about Robert, about your life together, about what you learned from watching him work. That's the real story here. The love and dedication that went into creating something meant to last. The ballroom was filled with Portland's architectural and philanthropic community. Maybe 300 people an evening were sipping wine and examining the photographs of historically significant buildings displayed around the room. I felt my stomach twist with nerves as Thomas introduced me, but when I stood at the podium and looked out at all those faces, I found Sophie and Charlotte sitting in the front row. They'd come on their own, without telling their parents, dressed in their best outfits and smiling at me with pride and love. I spoke for 20 minutes about Robert, about watching him work with wood and metal and glass, about the way he'd taught himself traditional techniques from old books and master craftsmen, about his belief that anything worth doing was worth doing with complete attention and care. I talked about the house he'd built for us, each room a reflection of his skill and his love, each detail intentional and meaningful. And then I talked about the battle to preserve it. I didn't name Marcus or Vanessa, didn't go into details that would seem vindictive or bitter. Instead, I talked about the importance of protecting legacies, about standing up for what matters, about refusing to let greed and short-term thinking destroy something built to last. My husband believed in permanence, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. He believed that the work you do should outlast you, should serve future generations, should stand as testament to the fact that you were here and you mattered. When someone tried to take that away for their own profit, I had a choice. I could accept it, could go quietly and let everything Robert built be destroyed or diminished. Or I could fight. I chose to fight. The applause when I finished was thunderous. People stood, and I saw tears on many faces, saw nods of recognition from others who'd probably faced similar battles in their own families. Thomas presented me with a plaque recognizing my contribution to historic preservation, and I felt Robert's presence so strongly in that moment that I had to blink back tears. He would have been embarrassed by the attention but proud of what we'd accomplished together. At the reception afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories. An architect whose family had tried to sell his father's mid-century modern masterpiece to developers. A woman whose siblings wanted to tear down their grandmother's Victorian to build something more modern. A man whose children were fighting over whether to preserve or profit from the craftsman bungalow he'd lovingly restored. Each story was a variation on the same theme, the tension between preservation and profit, between honoring the past and cashing in on the present. I found myself giving the same advice to each of them. Document everything. Get legal help early. Don't assume family will do the right thing just because they're family. Protect what matters while you still can. Sophie and Charlotte stayed by my side through most of the reception, and I watched them soak in the conversations, the ideas, the recognition that their grandmother wasn't just some old woman to be managed, but someone with wisdom and strength and a story worth telling. On the drive home that night, Linda at the wheel since I was exhausted, I felt something shift inside me. For months I'd been focused on protecting what I had, on defending against attack, on preventing loss. But tonight had shown me something different. I wasn't just preserving Robert's legacy. I was creating my own. The legal advocacy program at the shelter. The relationships with my granddaughters built on honesty instead of obligation. The public stand I'd taken about the importance of protecting what matters. All of it was adding up to something larger than just one old woman's fight with her ungrateful son. It was becoming a movement, or at least the seed of one. Summer brought another surprise, this time in the form of a letter from Marcus. It arrived on a Tuesday in June. His handwriting on the envelope instantly recognizable despite the year that had passed since we'd spoken. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, my heart hammering with anxiety and something that might have been hope despite my better judgment. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on his personal stationery. No typed formality, no legal language, just his words in his own hand. Dear Mom, it began. I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll throw it away without opening it or burn it or tear it into pieces. I would understand if you did. I've spent the last year trying to figure out how everything went so wrong, how I became the kind of person who could do what I did to you. I've started therapy. Vanessa and I are separated. She moved out 3 months ago and filed for divorce. The girls are splitting time between us, but I know they're spending their weekends with you, and I'm glad. I'm glad they have you even if I don't. The hospital demoted me after several colleagues reported concerns about my judgment. Apparently word got around about what I tried to do to you, and in the medical community elder abuse is taken seriously. Who knew? I'm no longer department head, just a regular attending physician, and honestly it's what I deserve. I've lost your trust. I've damaged my career. I'm losing my marriage, and all of it is my fault. I let Vanessa convince me that you were a burden instead of a blessing, that your house was an asset instead of a home, that your age made you incompetent instead of wise. I looked at you and saw dollar signs instead of the woman who sacrificed everything to raise me. I became the kind of person I would have despised if I'd met him in any other context. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm not writing to ask you to change your will. What you've done with the house and your estate is right and good and exactly what Dad would have wanted. I'm writing because I need you to know that I understand what I did. I understand what I lost. And I'm sorry. So incredibly sorry. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling different emotions surge through me. Anger at what he'd done. Sadness for what we'd lost. Relief that he finally understood. Uncertainty about what this meant for the future. I showed the letter to Gerald during our weekly lunch the next day. He read it carefully, his face neutral, then set it down and looked at me. How do you feel about this? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to believe he's genuinely changed. Part of me thinks this is just another manipulation, a different strategy to get back into my good graces. And part of me is just tired. Tired of being angry, tired of being hurt, tired of this whole situation. Gerald nodded slowly. Those are all valid responses. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I thought about that for a long time. What did I want? Did I want reconciliation with Marcus? Did I want to maintain the boundaries I'd established? Did I want something in between? Do you know what Robert would say? I asked Gerald. He'd been Robert's best friend. Knew him as well as anyone. Gerald smiled sadly. Robert would say that people can change, but they have to prove it through actions, not just words. He'd say that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or accepting unacceptable behavior. And he'd say that you should do whatever brings you peace, because you've earned it. I decided to respond to Marcus's letter, but carefully, with clear boundaries. I spent 3 days crafting my reply, working through multiple drafts until I had something that felt honest without being cruel, open without being naive. Marcus, I wrote. I received your letter and I appreciate your honesty. I'm glad you're in therapy and I hope it helps you understand not just what you did to me, but why you were susceptible to that kind of thinking in the first place. I'm sorry your marriage is ending, but I'm not sorry about the consequences you've faced professionally. Actions have repercussions and you're learning that the hard way. I want you to know that my will and estate plans will not change. The house remains in trust, my assets remain designated for charity, and those decisions are final. This is not punishment, though I understand you may experience it that way. This is about ensuring that your father's legacy is preserved, and that the resources I've accumulated go to people who genuinely need help rather than people who took me for granted. As for our relationship, I'm not ready for reconciliation. Maybe someday, but not now. The hurt is still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. What I am willing to do is leave the door open for the possibility of healing. But that will require time and consistent demonstration that you've genuinely changed. Not just words but actions. Not just apologies but different choices. I'm proud of Sophie and Charlotte for maintaining a relationship with me despite the situation. They're remarkable young women and you should be proud of them too. I hope you'll support their connection with me, rather than seeing it as disloyalty to you. I'm not interested in creating division in your family. I'm interested in having honest relationships with my granddaughters. I don't hate you, Marcus. I'm disappointed and hurt, but I don't hate you. I hope you find peace and I hope you become the man your father believed you could be. But I will not sacrifice my security or my boundaries to make that easier for you. I mailed the letter and felt lighter somehow. Not forgiven, not forgotten, but addressed. I'd said what needed to be said without closing every door or opening myself up to more hurt. Felt like the right balance. Marcus wrote back 2 weeks later, a shorter letter this time. Thank you for responding. Thank you for being honest. I understand your boundaries and I respect them. I won't push for more than you're willing to give. I hope someday I can earn back even a fraction of your trust. Until then, I'll work on becoming someone worthy of it. We didn't speak after that, didn't see each other. But the letters continued sporadically. He'd write every month or so, updating me on his therapy progress, on changes he was making in his life, on moments when he recognized old patterns and chose differently. I'd respond briefly, acknowledging his efforts without offering absolution. It wasn't reconciliation, but it wasn't total estrangement either. It was something in between, something cautious and conditional, and maybe, eventually, something that could grow into healing. The legal advocacy program at the shelter grew beyond anything I'd imagined. By the end of the first year, we'd helped over 100 women protect themselves from financial exploitation. Gerald recruited 2 recent law school graduates who wanted to specialize in elder law, and convinced their firm to let them dedicate half their time to pro bono cases through our program. We partnered with social workers and financial advisors to provide comprehensive support, not just legal representation but practical help with banking, estate planning, and safety planning. One case in particular stayed with me. Eleanor was 82, a former teacher whose daughter and son-in-law had moved into her house claiming they needed temporary help. Temporary had turned into 3 years, during which they'd pressured her to sign over power of attorney, emptied her savings account, and began the process of having her declared incompetent so they could sell her house. She came to us terrified, convinced there was nothing she could do, that her daughter would succeed in taking everything. Our team worked with her for 6 months, gathering documentation of her mental competence, proving that her daughter had forged signatures on several financial documents, building a case for elder abuse and fraud. The day we went to court, Eleanor was shaking so badly she could barely stand. But when the judge reviewed the evidence and ruled in her favor, ordering her daughter and son-in-law to vacate the property immediately and face criminal charges for their actions, Eleanor stood straighter than I'd seen her stand in months. After the hearing, she hugged me in the courthouse hallway and whispered, "You saved my life. Not just my house, my life. I was ready to give up. You showed me I still had fight left in me. That's what this is about," I told her. Not just winning cases or protecting assets, but reminding women that they have value beyond what they can provide to others. That their lives matter. That they deserve dignity and respect regardless of their age. The shelter named the program after me at the 2nd annual fundraising gala, the Dorothy Hayes Silver Shield Legal Advocacy Project. I protested, embarrassed by the recognition, but Patricia was insistent. "You started this," she said. "Your courage to fight back inspired all of it. Let other women see your name and know that resistance is possible. So I accepted, and watched as the program that had grown from my own pain became something that helped hundreds of other women avoid similar fates. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had tried to diminish me, to render me powerless and irrelevant. Instead, he'd catalyzed the most meaningful work of my life. Sophie graduated from high school that spring with honors and a full scholarship to study creative writing at a prestigious university. She asked me to come to her graduation, warned me that Marcus and Vanessa would both be there, that it might be uncomfortable. I went anyway, sat on the opposite side of the auditorium from them, and cheered when Sophie's name was called. Afterward, at the reception, Sophie brought both her parents over to where I stood with Charlotte and Linda. We stood in awkward silence for a moment. For adults who'd once been family now separated by a chasm of hurt and betrayal. "Congratulations on your daughter," I said finally to Marcus. "She's extraordinary." "Thank you," he said quietly. "She learned her strength from you." Vanessa said nothing, just stood with her arms crossed looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. But Marcus met my eyes and I saw genuine regret there. Genuine recognition of what he'd lost. It didn't heal everything, didn't erase what had happened, but it was something. A small acknowledgement that maybe someday there might be a path to something resembling peace. Sophie hugged me tight before I left. "Thank you for coming, Grandma. It meant everything to have you here." "I wouldn't have missed it," I told her. "I'm so proud of you. Not just your academic success but the person you've become. Kind and brave and willing to think for yourself. That's worth more than any scholarship." Summer settled over Portland with its usual mix of warm days and cool nights, and I found myself settling into a rhythm that felt right. Mornings in my garden, tending the roses Robert had planted and the vegetables I'd added over the years. Afternoons at the shelter, working with women who needed support in advocacy. Evenings with friends, with books, with the watercolor painting I'd taken up and discovered I actually had some talent for. Sophie and Charlotte visited regularly, sometimes together, sometimes individually. Sophie would bring her writing for me to read, short stories and essays exploring themes of family and loyalty and betrayal, processing her own experience through fiction. Charlotte had developed an interest in architecture and would spend hours in the house with me, sketching details and asking questions about Robert's techniques. They were building their own relationships with me separate from their parents, relationships based on genuine connection rather than obligation or expectation. On my 71st birthday, I hosted a small party at the house. Not family this time but the family I'd chosen. Linda and Gerald and Patricia from the shelter. Thomas from the Historic Preservation Society. Sophie and Charlotte. The other women from the Silver Shield Board. We ate dinner at the mahogany table, laughed and told stories and toasted to another year of life lived on my own terms. No one tried to institutionalize me. No one suggested I was too old or too frail or too incompetent. They saw me as I was, a woman who'd survived betrayal and come out stronger. A woman who'd turned pain into purpose. A woman who refused to be diminished by age or circumstance. As we sat around the table after dinner, Charlotte asked me a question that made everyone go quiet. "Grandma, do you think you'll ever forgive Dad?" I thought about that for a long moment, aware of everyone watching me, waiting to see how I'd answer. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Forgiveness is complicated. It's not a switch you flip or a decision you make once and it's done. It's a process and I'm still in the middle of it. What I do know is that I've forgiven myself. For taking so long to see what was happening. For the years I spent sacrificing my own needs to make everyone else comfortable. For believing that being a good mother meant never saying no or setting boundaries. I've forgiven myself for all of that. And that's the forgiveness that matters most." The room was silent for a moment, then Gerald raised his glass. "To Dorothy," he said, "who taught us all what strength looks like." We drank to that, and I felt Robert's presence so strongly in that moment that I had to excuse myself for a moment, step out onto the back porch where he'd built a swing years ago, where we'd sat together on summer evenings watching the sun set over the city. "I miss you," I whispered to the gathering darkness. "I wish you were here to see what I've done with the life we built together." A breeze rustled through the maple trees, carrying the scent of roses and freshly cut grass, and I felt answer enough. Robert would have been proud. Not just of the house I'd protected or the legacy I'd preserved, but of the woman I'd become in his absence. Strong enough to stand alone. Brave enough to fight for what mattered. wise enough to know the difference between forgiveness and foolishness. I went back inside to my chosen family, to the people who saw my value and celebrated my existence, and I knew with absolute certainty that I'd made the right choices. Every single one of them. Marcus had tried to write the ending of my story, had tried to decide when and how I became irrelevant. Instead, I'd written my own ending, or rather my own continuation, because at 71 I was far from finished. The house Robert built still stood strong around me. The programs I'd helped create still served women who needed them. My granddaughter still visited and learned and grew into remarkable young women who knew their worth. And I still woke up every morning in my own bed, in my own home, living life exactly as I chose. That was the real victory. Not revenge against Marcus, not punishment for Vanessa, but the simple, profound act of living well despite their attempts to diminish me. Of turning 70 and being told I was done, that my life was over, that I had no choice left. And responding by proving that I was just beginning, that I had more choices than they could imagine, that I was nobody's victim and never would be again. The call came on a rainy October afternoon 2 years after that catastrophic birthday party. I was in the garden cutting back the last of the season's roses when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Dr. Patel from Portland General. I'm calling about your son Marcus. He's been in an accident." My heart stopped. The anger, the hurt, all of it vanished in an instant, replaced by pure maternal terror. "Is he alive?" "He's stable but injured. A car accident on the highway. He's asking for you." I was in my car within minutes, Linda insisting on driving because my hands were shaking too badly. All the careful boundaries I'd built, all the measured distance I'd maintained, none of it mattered in the face of that primal fear. He was my son. Whatever else had happened, whatever betrayals lay between us, he was still my son. The hospital was chaos, but Dr. Patel met me in the waiting area. "He has a concussion, 2 broken ribs, and a fractured leg. He'll recover fully, but he was very insistent that we call you. Not his ex-wife, not anyone else. You." Marcus was in a private room, his leg elevated, bandages visible under his hospital gown. When I walked in, his eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I came home." I sat beside his bed and took his hand, careful of the 4-line. "I'm here. I thought I was going to die," he whispered. In those seconds before the airbag deployed, all I could think about was how I'd never told you that you were right. About everything. About Vanessa, about the house, about what matters. I was wrong and you were right, and I wasted 2 years being too proud to say it. I stayed with him through the night while he drifted in and out of medicated sleep. Sophie and Charlotte arrived in the morning, relieved to find their father bruised but alive. We stood together in his hospital room. 3 generations navigating complicated love and complicated history. Over the following weeks, as Marcus recovered, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of it. He didn't ask about the will or the house. He asked about my life, my work at the shelter, my painting. He listened when I talked about the historic preservation project and said, "Dad would be so proud of what you've done." When he was released from the hospital, he asked if he could visit the house once before the trust took permanent effect. Not to argue or plead, just to see it one more time. I said yes. He walked through each room slowly, touching the banister Dad had carved, examining the joints in the cabinetry, standing for a long time in front of the stained glass window. "I never really looked at it before," he said quietly. "I lived here my whole childhood and I never actually saw what he built. I was too busy taking it for granted." We stood together in the living room where he'd ambushed me 2 years earlier, where everything had fallen apart. "I'm not going to ask you to change anything," he said. "The house should be preserved exactly as you've planned. But I want you to know that I finally understand what I tried to destroy. Not just a building, but a testament to love and dedication and everything that actually matters." Before he left, I gave him something I'd been keeping in Robert's study. A leather journal where his father had documented the construction of the house, sketches and notes and measurements, his thoughts and plans and dreams. "This is yours," I told Marcus. "Not the house, but the story of how it was built. Your father's words, his process, his love for our family. That's your inheritance." He held the journal like it was made of glass, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you. I don't deserve this." "No," I said gently. "You don't. But your father would have wanted you to have it anyway. That's what love is. Not deserving but being given grace anyway. We didn't magically reconcile after that. Trust rebuilds slowly through consistent action over time. But we began having coffee once a month, awkward at first, then gradually easier. He told me about his therapy, about recognizing the patterns that had made him vulnerable to Vanessa's manipulation, about learning to value people over profit. I told him about the women we were helping at the shelter, about Eleanor and Margaret and all the others who'd found their strength again. One afternoon nearly 3 years after everything fell apart, Marcus brought me a folder. Inside were architectural drawings, plans for a small addition to his new house. A workshop, he said. I've been taking woodworking classes. I'll never be as good as Dad, but I want to learn what he knew. I want to build something with my own hands instead of just taking what other people built. I looked at the drawings and saw Robert's influence in every line. Saw my son trying to find his way back to the values he'd lost. It's a good design, I told him. Your father would approve. On my 73rd birthday, we had a small gathering at the house. Marcus came with Sophie and Charlotte. Linda and Gerald were there, Patricia from the shelter, Thomas from the Preservation Society. We ate dinner at the mahogany table, and for the first time in years, it felt almost like family again. Not the family I'd once had, innocent and unbroken, but something harder, one more honest, built on truth instead of assumption. When everyone had gone home except Marcus, we stood together on the back porch watching the sun set over the city. I'm sorry, he said for perhaps the 100th time. I know, I told him. And I'm getting closer to forgiveness. Not there yet, but closer. That's more than I deserve, he said quietly. Probably, I agreed. But maybe that's what grace is. Giving more than what's deserved because love is bigger than justice. The house would never be his. The money would never be his. But perhaps slowly, carefully, our relationship could be rebuilt into something real. Not what it had been, but something more honest, something that acknowledged both the love and the betrayal, both the past and the possibility of a different future. I am 73 years old and I have learned that endings are rarely clean, that reconciliation is messy and incomplete, that some wounds never fully heal but can be lived with. Marcus will never inherit this house, will never profit from my death, will always carry the weight of what he tried to do. But he is still my son, and I am still his mother, and somewhere in the space between those truths we are finding our way to peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.